So this story is called Coffee Grounds. James woke up, opened his eyes slowly, and lay there for a long while staring at the ceiling, tracing the spiderweb of cracks with his eyes, as he had done 1,001 times before. He looked over at the overflowing ashtray on the bedside table and reached in, rooted around in it, looking for the most viable box. He was dying for a smoke, and any that had more than a couple of millimeters of unsmoked length were fair game. But the pickings were slim. He had done this 1,000,000 times before, but not too many new butts had been added to the mix recently. Desperation. It was a state of mind he knew well. Couldn't even afford the price of a couple of smokes. He found 2 barely viable fag ends which gave him 2 quick breaths each, and that was that. Deciding that he may as well get up, James rolled over, shoved the long unwashed sheet aside, and stood up, the usual morning boner stretching out the front of his underwear. It seemed disembodied to him in a way. It wasn't just cigarettes that were in short supply. He hadn't scored any in a long time either. Longer than he cared to remember, in fact, and having a hard cock right then just seemed like a frustratingly bad joke. A needless additional reminder of how fucked up things had become for him. Ignoring the boner, which eventually disappeared, he walked to the alcove that served as the kitchen in his rat hole of an apartment, filled the tank of the coffee maker from the tap over the overflowing sink, deliberately ignoring the debris therein, plugged it in, rummaged through the kitchen cupboard for some coffee and a filter, loaded the machine and flipped the switch on. That short exercise told him that at least 2 of his utilities were still in working order, and that at least he had something hot and drinkable in the house. A wry grin escaped in the darkness, and a mouthed sardonic, "Thanks God for small mercies." Who knew how much longer the gas and water would still be there? Both bills were each a couple months old, and he had no idea when they would be paid. Standing at the sink, he watched the stream of amber liquid eventually begin to flow down into the jug. The coffee ground and filter were yesterday's, which accounted for the color. The flavor would be more than a bit thin too, but at least it was hot, and that was the main thing. He fished a cup out of the sink, rinsed it, filled it, and walked over to the beat-up dining table next to the window, sat and sipped, staring outside. And his thoughts turned again to the same thing, the only thing, in fact, that was on his mind and had been for months. How the hell had life become so completely and totally fucked up? How in the name of God had he fallen so far, so fast? How come someone like him, at only 35, had become so utterly washed up? One day, he was one of the masters of the universe, with his name on everyone's lips, widely expected to be the next big thing. That James Carville, they said, had the chops of the great sage of Omaha himself. That Jimmy, everyone said, had a bright future. The next Warren Buffett. And then the bubble burst. And the fall had been precipitous. And he had no idea how he was going to dig himself out of a hole this deep. The truth was that James had got greedy. For a long time he had been lucky. He had joined the trading firm at just the right time, and every investment he made, every trade, had paid off. The man with the Midas touch, they called him, and unfortunately for him, he too had begun to believe that he was invincible, and that he did have the Midas touch. And so he began to get careless. The key to James's success had been his meticulous attention to detail and endless preparation. When he approached any client to present an investment opportunity, he could do so with the assuredness born of intimate familiarity with whichever company or entity he had in his crosshairs. Annual reports and balance sheets were studied with the zeal of monks studying the Bible, and rumors of corporate movements were tracked down with the diligence of Sherlock Holmes. Consequently, he could speak authoritatively and in-depth about any firm that he was encouraging his clients to put their money into. And his clients had responded. and he had made more than a few of them rich, or in many cases at least a good deal richer than they had been. As his reputation grew, his services came to be in greater and greater demand, and his Rolodex expanded accordingly. Six-figure deals became routine. Greenwich and Haynes, the Kingston-based company James worked for, had expanded at phenomenal speed over a brief 5-year period, largely on the back of his efforts, and the rewards had come his way thick and fast as well. Everything, including the Belgrade Heights townhouse overlooking the city of Kingston and out to Kingston Harbour and beyond. A truly spectacular view, especially at sunset. Porsche Cayenne and other expensive toys, designer clothes, membership in the Constant Spring Golf Club, though he didn't play golf, being more of a cricket lover. And of course, a substantial bank account. Life was good. He had arrived. And his arrival had coincided with his 30th birthday, for which he had bought himself another townhouse as a gift to himself. But with the success had come the distractions. His immediate family had started to make extra demands on him, and other relatives had also come crawling out of the woodwork, and he had been duty-bound to help them. From utility bills to hire purchase payments to school fees and more, they had all beat a path to his door with hands outstretched. On top of that were friends who had also made their demands. As taxing, literally, as those importunities were, though, they had been bearable. No, the real problem was that he had taken his eye off the ball. And just like in cricket, when you take your eye off the ball, you are likely to get hit hard. He started to get careless and started to wing it. Having established a track record as an investment guru of sorts, clients had started to take his word at face value. Jimmy boy, they used to say, your word is golden, man. Which would have been fine if his word had been backed up, as it used to be, by diligent homework. Sure, for a while it had worked. Instinct did count for something, and he had done that. But the thing was, James had become distracted largely by two things, or more accurately, two people. His eyes had been taken off the ball and become firmly affixed to the alluring Alison St. John and to Alan Stanford. One took his heart, the other his money. The estimable, alluring Miss St. John was the daughter of the president of one of the local banks, and at 28 was single, gorgeous, and connected. In other words, the perfect object of desire for a single, handsome, smart, go-getter 30-year-old guy, who, it was generally agreed, was one of the most desirable bachelors on the cocktail circuit. It was the perfect match, or so he had thought at the time. They were introduced by mutual friends at a jazz concert at the Red Bones Blues Cafe, and thereafter they were inseparable. Whether it was trips to Lime Key, liming at the Calabash Literary Festival, playing mass at Carnival, or hanging out at the Air Jamaica Jazz and Blues Festival, James and Alison were joined at the hip. A year later he proposed. She accepted, and the Christmas Eve wedding at the University Chapel and reception at Strawberry Hills high in the Blue Mountains was an A-list event. She moved into the apartment at Belgrade Heights, which he had generously put in both their names as a tangible symbol of their union, and the wonderful life of wedded bliss he had hoped to lead with her. It was not long after the wedding, though, that Alison began to reveal herself as the quintessential high-maintenance mate. She constantly demanded they go out and socialize, especially at the times when James needed to spend time doing background company research, which, admittedly, was of necessity time-consuming. Then she got pregnant, and a difficult pregnancy it was too. It was Alison's first pregnancy, and so it had its fair share of difficulty. But that was not helped by the fact that she also proved to be something of a hypochondriac. The constant visits to the doctor, half of them completely unnecessary, waking up at all hours of the night, having to take days off on end to deal with his wife's neuroses and fears, both real and imaginary, took its toll. At first, the impact on his work was minimal. A couple of meetings missed here and there, a few reports left on the back seat of his Porsche Cayenne left unread, and though he had missed a few minor movements in the market, those developments had not had much of an impact on the performance of the companies involved. That came later. And then his daughter arrived, his first child. James was naturally ecstatic. James could, and often did, sit by the crib for hours playing with little Monique, or just looking at her, marveling at this perfect, miraculous little creation that was a part of him in a way that just about no one else was. And then would come the haranguing voice of Allison, upset about something or other. In the 2 years that went by after the wedding, he had hoped that things would have improved, but his wife had become someone he had hardly recognized. A shrill harpy who constantly criticized him for not spending time with her, for taking their friends' sides against her in arguments about her, and just about anything else she could think of. Love-making, once wild, passionate, creative, and frequent, had gradually disappeared, and the marriage had become an ordeal. Postpartum depression, the psychologist he consulted had described it as, and the doctor, sitting in his comfortable, sunlit office at the university hospital, had counseled patience and support. God knows he had tried, but nothing he tried to do helped. In the meantime, he had become increasingly forgetful and careless at work. Philip, his manager and good friend, the best man at his wedding in fact, had tried to be supportive and understanding, but after the mistakes began to cost the firm serious money, issued him an ultimatum. Either he get his act together by any means necessary, or find a new gig. He had a month to sort things out. Can I stop here for now? Okay. Then got 2 more pages, you can do the rest of it all. Thanks.
Thank you, Nora.